So what I wanted to really bring home here is connecting what he just talked about, which obviously is global, it's complex, it's it may not feel very connected to your day-to-day life as a clinician, what he just talked about necessarily, but it is, and that's what I want to impress on you guys this evening. The knowledge about mHealth, as well as the self-awareness about your attitudes towards it and your attitudes towards looking at mobile and web in the lives of your clients, as well as creating some immediately applicable tools. Hopefully you'll come away from tonight with some things you can use tomorrow, and then some leadership strategies and how can we move forward in creating this possibility. So I want to start with some background. In terms of the American context, almost all of us have cell phones, 58% of us have smartphones. It's really interesting how the age cohort breaks down. Young people, 88% or 83%, and it really drops off the older you go. And some psychological aspects of that. 67% of people check their phone for messages, even though it hasn't vibrated or done anything to tell you there's a message. Who's done that? Right. Who's slept with their phone next to them? Right. 44% of people say they do that. And who feels like they just actually couldn't live without their phone? I'm in that category. I'll confess. I could survive, but so this is just a schematic that's about sort of the stages of adoption and incorporates the model of change. There's a pre-contemplation, contemplation, readiness, implementation, and expansion phases. And what we have here is it's a schematic that's based on some of these statistics and findings. The idea is that youth are way out there. Adults are generally using the technologies. Seniors are lagging, but they're ready. The medical profession has been moving quickly in this direction, but they're still well behind. It's not like a universally deployed reality that people are using mobile and web in practice. And in our field, behavioral health, we're just starting to think about it, by and large. There are some examples I'm going to show you that are out on the leading edge, but in the average context, the reality is a lot of us have thought maybe it would be nice, but don't really have the roadmap or the tools to do that. And so I want to start with an example of an app for schizophrenia that was developed out of Dartmouth. There's a Dartmouth Center for Behavioral Health Technology there. It supports self-management of the illness in a kind of behavioral model. So this is after the person leaves an outpatient context. So they're not even in any kind of outpatient care, and they're given an app. And it provides them the opportunity to check in on a regular basis, daily, and unlimited on-demand use of cognitive behavioral tools, as well as psychoeducation. And then they do have a clinician that can see how they're doing on a dashboard. And this is a relatively early stage project, but the results indicate that there is some positive impact. And so I want to also talk to you about the HS app. This is probably the leading academically produced app that addresses addiction. It's out of the University of Madison, Wisconsin. It provides a multi-purpose set of tools, and this might be a little hard to see, so I'll point at a few of them. There's essentially a connection to a support team, discussions, talking with other people in your network, finding meetings, events you can go to, a host of social tools and information and connection. The role of the clinician here is not that significant. However, the people in the study did engage with the app, did find it valuable, and 80% of those were still using it 16 weeks later to stay plugged in, which if you think about a substance abuse recovery context, 16 weeks of staying plugged into a recovery community is not insignificant. 70% of dual diagnosis work. So there's some real pointers towards possibility here. Finally, this is the last one I want to show you in this context is the Buddy app. It's developed in partnership with the National Health Service in the UK. Very simple program. All it is SMS text messaging that the clinician sets up. So this is the first one we're seeing where it's about direct interaction with the clinician. And the app simply takes the SMS and it's a rating of 1 to 10, how was your day? And you can put in some more language about what happened during your day. And the clinician sees a dashboard of their clients and can drill into them and see their history and watch over time how they've been doing. The numbers indicate from the studies that have done with this that 25% higher completion rates of therapy. So you spoke about the 50% no-show rate. This could potentially have an impact in terms of people actually completing the process of therapy.
So I have a question. So what about the information that people are entering? So for example, someone texted, "Hi, I'm suicidal."
Okay. So the question was, what about the information that people are entering? What if somebody texts, "Hi, I'm suicidal"? That's a great question, and we're going to address that. The reality is that this system doesn't provide any specific remedies for that, and that it's actually the context I would compare it to. What you're saying is if a clinician had a voicemail set up, right? People don't have an expectation that if somebody leaves that message that they're going to be able to act on it immediately because voicemail is only intermittently accessed. So similarly, this dashboard is only intermittently accessed, and the expectation is set for that. So there is
each has their capability. You're out. You are developing suicide apps, so that we have an app out that's address that issue. Each has a panic button which allows the person to connect with their counselor or therapist. So there are apps that can be tailored to a more complex situation. That's right, it just depends on the previous speaker pointed out, it depends on the pipeline, the kind of resources you have to expose, and if you have a smartphone or a regular phone, the person has pretty fun projects that since it gave out smartphones to people, gave out tablets, one project gave out tablets. Two people, one people used it, two, they disappear.
the tablets.
Interesting.
So for those of you that completely hear that SAMHSA is exploring creating that possibility of technology that will address this. He was pointing to the panic button. It's the life preserver icon right there, and it's connected into a technology that is going in that direction. Now we had a little bit of call out earlier. From what you just saw right there, any useful tools spring to mind in terms of your particular practice? Like, would you like to stay in contact with your clients in some fashion? So you're not running out of hands. Okay.
We didn't talk about group therapy possibilities with these systems, ones that with capabilities and group communication. We also did talk about Skype and the use of Skype as a way encrypted to have there are now apps that allow encrypted telebehavior health encrypted so that it meets OSC's and FDA's concerns about privacy. But there are a bunch of therapists who are using Skype unencrypted and nobody seems to have blown up or had a calamity yet. So there are other ways that you can use your system at your disposal in order to facilitate the behavior. We can also talk about assessment tools that are health and wellness assessment, primary care settings, PhD9, and clinical settings where you want to use depression scales, anxiety scales, etc. It's well-established tools that have been done as part of early engagement.
So Dr. Clark was pointing to a few things. One is availability of assessment tools. So there are apps that are available that can walk a person through a depression assessment or any number of assessments, as well as video. So being able to do remote sessions over secure video. And it's really a big world. There's about 50,000 plus medical or M-Health related apps on the US market. The key thing to know is that very few of them are developed in collaboration with folks like him. Most of them are programmers sitting in their basement and just trying something. And so it makes a real impact and difference whether or not systems are developed in collaboration with technologists and clinicians. So I want to talk about some implementation challenges here. When you talk about bringing an app into your clinical practice, obviously the first thing you're thinking about is this person ready for it? Is there a digital divide issue? And I also want to encourage you to flip that and think about, is there a digital divide issue with me? I mean, you guys are here, you're interested in this area, but in your organizations, I'm sure you have seen that it goes the other way too. That there are a lot of folks that, don't think that that's going to work or just aren't connected to it. So that's there. Also issues with disabilities, language issues. In terms of clinical challenges, make sure you have informed consent and people really understand what they're doing when they're using the technology. That's a really important part of the process. As well as, and this goes back to the point about lots of apps being out there, but not very many of them being well researched. The efficacy point, if you're talking to somebody about using an app, you want to know that it's based on something, that there's some research, that there's some backup to being able to use it effectively. And finally, continuity of care. So there's a whole set of medical records or health records that are going to get created when somebody uses an app to interact with you. Those are health records. And so how are you going to transition those to other folks? And how are you going to transition care? So that's also related to privacy and HIPAA issues. Making sure that whatever system you use is actually HIPAA compliant, and that it integrates with your system and your organization in some fashion. Obviously your administrative officers of your organizations aren't going to be too pleased if you bring in something that doesn't connect to anything else, and now they've got an administrative headache on their hands figuring out how much time to bill and how to do that. And then the practice management piece of how do you actually manage your day, and we're going to get more into that. What does it look like to have apps be part of your practice as a clinician? And then the financing and billing piece of, we don't even have yet billing codes in any significant way for this area. We don't necessarily have clinician time codes to bill for your time in very small increments. So how all those things, those are major challenges. Another set of challenges are the research challenges. So standardizing how we even talk about clinical interventions. You talk to a CBT person, a psychodynamic person, and they're going to talk about depression itself differently, interventions for it differently, and then so how does that manifest in terms of how we actually implement technology for that? And then the technical challenges that Dr. Peck really got into. There's a lot of technology out there; it's complicated, and so as a clinician, you need those all solved in such a clean way that you can really trust the app in your practice. There's also ethical challenges, and a lot of those were connected to the challenges I just talked about. You want to screen your clients for appropriateness, those sort of the digital divide kind of thing. You want to make sure that the duty to warn piece is addressed, like that they are aware that you're only going to see what they're putting into the app at certain intervals, and that's very clear. I actually yet have to find an app that really does that really well. Liability, privacy, efficacy, these are all ethical issues that, and so what I'm trying to get at with this slide more than anything is there's a good reason where we're at as a community in terms of behavioral health. There's lots of reasons. This is hard stuff.
On the apps, like you're talking about before, with you have stories that are kind of illiterate, where when they push that they get through it with a person.
So the question was regarding illiteracy, and if you have an illiterate client, are there apps available that you can, that are available to serve them? I haven't personally run across that. It's certainly potentially possible, I would think, using graphical and visual, but somebody would really have to, understand that context and really build specifically for it. And that, as far as I know, hasn't happened yet. It's a great question. The the one last piece I want to touch on here is assessment and interpretation. You're going to get a lot of information if you start using an app with a client, and you have an ethical responsibility to appropriately assess what that stuff means. It's not necessarily just cut and dry, right? It's going to take some clinical discernment to determine, and that's what our second part is really going to be about, is getting into the psychology of how people use these devices and what that means for your relationship with them and how you can understand better what they're doing with you using the devices. Let's get the pair chair here, but does anybody have any big hurdles or?
Yeah. The evolving thing in behavioral health at the moment is an ethical question. That is the issue of social media. The evolving literature is suggesting in these primary care and some behavioral health context. So what is our relationship with our clients in social media? We can people disclose a lot of things in social media that may have clinical implications. The most recent example, tragedy in Santa Barbara. The young man is not only on YouTube, but on bodybuilding.org and anti-peoplepartists.com, whatever it is. And so the question is, in fact, is therapists assess increased danger based on his YouTube video. Parents picked it up, called the therapist viewed the videos, called the police. Didn't look at the video. So it's a clinical assessment of the gravity of the person. It's a terror assault situation, do you warn, and then it's when you do this. So these are things that are already in play and have been invoked both in the academic literature and church.
So I'm glad you brought that up. He was referring to the Islamistic killer that happened on the 23rd. He's shared out his threats over social media. His therapist found out about it, saw it, carried out his duty to warn, let the police know, and the police took no action, and didn't actually view the video. This stuff is tricky, right? Like once you start to think about how do my clients use social media and actually start to plug into that, there needs to be a lot of support and guidance around what you do with it. Okay. Yeah.
When Skype from apps from text messages into one client record?
That's a great question. So the question is, how do you blend all the different potential sources into one client record? And I'm going to have an answer for you in a little bit. Just like a couple minutes. Hold on. There's another question?
So I was wondering, if you were looking at kind of information coming from a client's position, what are some things that, because I'm thinking in terms of an ethical dilemma. I saw people, I was located in Washington, D.C., and I saw people that were located across state lines. And so it was the military uses it because they only require one license, and there's federal property and federal property. And so that was the goal that we kind of used. But then if you're not on federal property, if you're just a clinician and I'm here and somebody's in Jersey, if the person has a problem, do they report it to Jersey, do they report it to DC, or do they report it to all the people? So that's one of the reasons that telehealth for the military, they were looking to basically have us work at home, be in our fluffy slippers and sitting at our BTCs. But the ethical dilemma at the time, and I don't know if there have been any legislation sort of changes that have been put in place, but it was where would someone even report an ethical complaint? Because it's, is it a place where the patient is living, or is it where he's licensed, and those sorts of things.
So to my knowledge, that hasn't been sorted out. The question was, there are jurisdictional issues in terms of duty to warn. There's also your license is located in a specific city or state. And so who do you report things to when somebody is a teleclient that's in another place? And what's your responsibility there? I don't know, Dr. I mean, I haven't seen an answer to that as yet. It seems like a complicated situation.
In duty to warn, the intended victim and the police were the patients, so that's fairly clear. The other ethical dilemma is to operate as a licensing thing. The licensing has been resolved. And other ethical dilemmas would be patients engaged in marginal behavior. So who do you report to the supervision? But if there's a threat, it's fairly well settled. You've got to report the threat to the place where that person is, unless you don't know where they're There are forensic electronic specialists nowadays who can track you down by IP address. So ostensibly, if you don't know where the person is, you can report to the police. Hopefully, they have some forensic specialists who know to track that person down. If you know the person in New Jersey and you're in DC, you have to report it to the local police so that they can intervene.
So for those that didn't get all of that, the duty to warn is to the place where there's a person at risk. So, but beyond that, the licensing issues are still mixed up and complicated as far as the right to practice and how's that work. Malpractice, right? So what I want to share here is a possibility that could address a lot of these concerns, and it's my belief that we really can address all these concerns. It's possible, and that as a community we can create that. And so what I wanted to share was this specific possibility. Now, imagine that you have a client. His name is Jay. We're going to talk about a counselor named Ed, and Jay's in early recovery, and he goes to see Ed for counseling. And after the initial intake, Ed tells Jay, I can support you using an app. And Jay says, that's great. The goals that we set out, it would be great if I could be supported through the app. And Ed has a tool to do that. And so he enters Jay's information into this tool, and he comes to this screen that is, thanks for inputting patient data. And that issues an invitation directly to Jay on his mobile phone to get the app. And the second piece is that Ed can then actually set up a very specific plan of action. So what this means is that there's a template that he can use, a template of treatment. Maybe Ed has a particular style of early recovery support, and so he integrates that into a template that he's already set up, and it's in this drop-down menu. And one of the questions, the primary question is, how often do you want the client to check in? If somebody's on day one, maybe you want morning, noon, and night. Jay's a little bit further along, and he selects noon. Okay, and so what then happens is Jay gets the app, and he sets up a PIN so it's secure, and then the next day at noon, actually has that check-in pop up. And the check-in that Ed set up was, were you able to call your sponsor? Yes or no? Which meeting do you plan to attend? And you can enter some text there. How was your mood? And there's a slider bar from 1 to 10. And then a checkbox to make further comments. And this was all set up by his counselor in the template. And then for the rest of the day, after this noon check-in, these are some actions that his counselor also enabled him to operate. Calling his sponsor, looking at his recovery calendar, seeing his mood graph, sending a message over to the clinician, viewing his progress in terms of his success with his daily check-ins, and to actually close out the app. So that's what his clinician set up for him just in those few seconds that he was able to set up that template and then send it out. And then this is what Ed sees the next morning. So Ed communicates that there is a social media check-in time that he has every day that's 9:30 in the morning, and that's actually built into the app, so that when Jay puts in his noon check-in, when it confirms, it says your clinician will see this at 9:30 tomorrow morning. So it's very clear that there's no immediacy of the communication. And what Ed sees is Jay called his sponsor. His mood is 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. And the comment that he made was, I've been feeling a bit depressed about getting a job due to my record. It's a little bit of information, And so Jay can then take some additional actions on behalf of Ed and issue him a message, share out video. He could activate GPS if they discussed that. And that, by the way, is shown to be a very efficacious thing to do with people in early recovery is GPS tracking. You could send an inspiration, edit his calendar, edit the basic template that he's working out of with this client. Also connect to social supports. One thing to note here is that, if you think as a clinician, if you just open yourself up to the world of social supports, it gets really complicated really quickly, right? So this is a facility for actually working with the client to say who are the people that you want to support you through the app and stepping them into it. And then you could share the record with a coworker with Jay's permission, and then view his overall progress similar to how Jay sees it. So this is a concept for how a clinician can actually drive the whole interaction through the technology in a relatively simple way. And the key thing to get about this is that it creates an extended care model. So regardless of what your particular practice style is, whether you're inpatient, outpatient, etc., day programs, you can now be in some higher level of communication, some level of extended care with your clients in a way that's manageable for you. And so, and then you can also include other professionals or paraprofessionals in the process. So, for example, if you're someone that bills $300 an hour and your client only sees you once a month, but you work with a team of recovery coaches that work for far less, and you're willing to incorporate them into your process of supporting this client, that they could immediately plug in, and vice versa. So the idea here is just a very general framework to start to think about how we can address clinically this really challenging landscape. So part of why we want to put this particular set of tools up is that we'll be coming back to this, because this is what we really think is going to help you think like clinicians when using technology, because it's connected into how you were really trained. You're really trained to pay attention to the verbal and nonverbal cues, to the immediacy, to what's happening right now with this particular client, what's clinically appropriate for the immediate future. And there isn't a whole lot out there that empowers the clinician to quite this degree. So,
I can only imagine, and I don't want to sound too negative, that I would get a million messages based on this information being input. And I'm already in technology overload, personally and professionally.
That's a great question. So the question was, what if I get a zillion messages, I'm already in technology overload? And that is the whole purpose of having this social media check-in time. And I'm showing it here, stylized on a mobile device. But realistically, if you're a clinician in your office, what you're going to do is log into a web dashboard that'll let you see 20 or 30 or 40 in a screen. And you'll see mostly green lights where people are doing well, and yellow lights or red lights where they're not. And so within a few minutes or moments even, you'll have an idea of who to focus your energies on. And the other piece of it is, because that block of time is set for this, the technology can also potentially, and I believe should, track your time on a per client basis, so that that's available to be billed. And that your clients, and this is part of what we'll get into a little bit later, when you interact with them, need to be normalized that this is part of how you work with them. You're not available 24/7, right? But you are available on a daily basis, or whatever level of increased interaction that is appropriate for you.
Yeah, that's an important point. You can schedule time. You can decide, you're going to look at the app at 8 o'clock, noon, 5 o'clock. That's when your message is going to show up. So ostensibly, you can have lunch and look at the noon app and say, okay, out of my 10 clients, only 2 have red lights. So everybody's okay. Second thing is, recovery app, you can also make sure your clients are engaged with peers, which then adds another layer to this, but especially for general mental health or people with cognitive illnesses, peer support becomes an important concept.
So I wanted to actually elaborate on that point a little bit. This question about were you able to call your sponsor, it's really only necessary if Jay hasn't already enrolled his sponsor in the system, right? Because once he has, the phone will know the sponsor's phone number, and we'll already be able to just pop up a message that says right there, you called your sponsor these times, good job, right? So there's a lot of that kind of under the hood automation possible that that really makes the interaction more effective.
How well is the security of the staff calling some sponsor unless you have the video as to encrypting the conversation so we can stay in compliant other
So the question was about security. So, you know, I've shown this to you all who are presumably practicing here in the United States and covered by HIPAA. It's absolutely essential that this be HIPAA compliant, which means the data is encrypted when at rest, that it's encrypted in transmission, that it's, you know, all the proper procedures are followed in terms of administering the systems on which this kind of data sits. You know, you couldn't do this without that.
Yeah, I can see the utility of this in many respects, and also being able to kind of contain or minimize issues of stigma with certain populations. But on the other side as well, I can see that a client's lack of adhering to these apps or to this model would suggest the fact that there needs to be more actually in office or face to face, which is good too. So, because I don't, and which means implies that in the initial assessment, not every client may be eligible to be engaged in this through this conduit.
So he was pointing to some of the clinical dynamics of how a client uses this and what that may signify and whether it's appropriate. That's what our whole second hour is about, and we're really going to get into that in a big way. So that was a little preview there. So the thing I want to sort of just close, and we'll go to dinner, is that you know, the concept here is that the clinician, you guys, you're the heart of this thing, right? If the relationship with you isn't working, it's very likely that not too much else is working for that client, right? And so the idea here is that you're in the lead. You're in the lead in terms of creating the relationship with your client. Through this means you're in the lead with working with researchers to put new templates into the system and figure out efficacy. That you're in the lead with the technologists who are building the apps and the modules that are plug into that screen. And you know, there's any number of things that you could do. Pretty much anything you could do with the device, you could potentially do in this kind of secured context, right? And that you all should be in the driver's seat with that. And that, you know, if this is really efficacious, payers ought to pay. And you all should have your time compensated. And so, you know, that's really the heart of this thing is that, you know, meeting your needs in order that you're able to meet your clients and that they're able to succeed, you know. And so we've already talked a little bit about how you see this as applicable in your practice. I'll maybe just make that kind of the dinner conversation topic. We're running a little bit behind time, but we have dinner outside. The key thing I want you to know again is that we're going to be shifting to another room after dinner, and the way that will work is we will, when time comes, gather everyone up, and it's just next door. It's not too far away at all. So please,
And it's air
enjoy dinner.
conditioned.
And
it's air conditioned.
it's air conditioned. Okay.